So today I just wanted to bring up some little stats from champs because I found some of this interesting myself, and I'm interested to see what some of you guys think about some of this as well. We'll just quickly start here with the map pool in general, where all of the maps bar Fracture have actually been picked a decent amount of similar times, which is good to see. In terms of some of the win rates, there are some outliers, like Split is heavily attack-sided, probably not something you super expect, but with the double duelist we're seeing on that map quite often, perhaps that's not too big of a surprise these days that it would be attack side leaning. Lotus as well is slightly attack side leaning, and Ascent defense side leaning, which I think most people will have come to expect by this point. But actually, most of the maps are doing decently well, and the overall attack win and defense win rate is 50-50, which is good to see. Shows that the game is, pretty balanced on the whole between the two sides. But now let's come to the agents, because there's some interesting things in here as well. And let's start off with the kind of top 6 here, which is what you could probably call the meta agents, right? You got a steep fall off from the 43% of Omen to the 28% of Astra. And, you've got 5 agents here above 50% pick rate across all maps. And they're the usual suspects that we've seen for most of this year: Killjoy, Viper, Skye, Raze, Jett, Omen. Now, there is one kind of surprise there, and that is Raze. And it's not necessarily that Raze is up here. Raze is obviously a very good agent, and we are seeing double duelist on some maps, so, that makes sense that you would see a bit of Raze. But it's more so that Raze is above Jett, and outside of, obviously, the Chamber meta, when Chamber kind of replaced Jett, outside of that, I don't think there's been any other time that I've seen Raze ahead of Jett, when we've been in kind of, a Jett meta for almost the entire game's history outside of that Chamber year. So that's kind of interesting to see Raze higher than Jett. But I've mentioned this elsewhere as well. The map pool right now for Jett is about as bad as it can be, right? We've got Split, where she's picked 42% of the time. You got Bind, where she's picked 13% of the time. You got Lotus, where it's down to 5%. You got Fracture, where it's down at 20%. That's 4 out of the 7 maps where, okay, on Split, she's sometimes picked in double duelist, but isn't the priority main pick. 4 out of the 7 maps, she's not going to be the primary duelist on the map, and in fact, Raze is going to be instead. Now, of course, that will be changing somewhat as Fracture gets removed, and Breeze, which I still think definitely will be a Jett map, even with the changes, is coming back in, and so that helps. But she is losing Pearl, which is 100% right now for Jett. And obviously we'll have to see what the new map entails in terms of what duelist that will be. But I just thought it was interesting that Raze has finally found a map pool where Raze is actually picked more than Jett. That's a big surprise. Obviously, when you start looking at like 50+% pick rates, that's when we start talking about maybe some of these agents need a nerf. Skye, I think, is one that a lot of people agree that the dog probably just needs to be, reduced in time, similar to an Al Drone kind of Fade Prowler. But then with the others, Killjoy, Viper, Jett, maybe even Raze, maybe even Omen, those ones I think are a bit more tricky, and people would probably have more disagreement in terms of what Riot should actually do with those agents. Let's now come further down to kind of the middle tier, shall we say, from like Fade at 15% to Astra up at 28%. We got Astra, Sova, Breach, Brim, KO, Fade, all on these kind of like mid-level pick rates. This is what you would call like, these agents are fine, right? They have maybe their own map or two that they see a bit of play on, and they're perfectly fine, and there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, and these agents can probably be left where they are. Then we move down slightly lower, and we have Cypher, Harbor, and Chamber all at 9%. Now, there's some interesting things here. Obviously, Cypher and Chamber very much in Killjoy's shadow, and that's something that might need to be readdressed. We saw teams like Zeta Division and Crew bring out the Chamber to much success at LCQ, but that has not really translated over at Champs. We are still seeing some Chamber. Fnatic tried it against DRX on Bind. That didn't go too well. They lost 13-1. We've seen even EG go for it on maps like Split as well. So the teams who are still deep in the tournament are still playing some Chamber. But on the whole, I don't think it's had the resurgence that perhaps we expected from LCQ. And Harbor is an interesting one as well, because obviously a lot of people, like, the thoughts on this meta is that we're in a Harbor Viper meta, but we're not really in a Harbor Viper meta at all. We're in a Killjoy Viper Skye meta, is probably a better way of putting it. And Harbor has seen a bit of a decline in play overall, especially on maps like Bind, where it used to be kind of a 50-50 between Harbor and Brim, but now Brim is the dominant choice on Bind for most of these teams. And even on maps like Pearl as well, it looks like the Pearl changes have had a really big impact on Harbor in terms of, just not being able to see that viability in play. I do still think, and you could make the argument similar to Jet, that this is about as bad as it could get for Harbor, really, in terms of map pool, right? Breeze will probably be a Harbor map, I think. Obviously, we'll have to see. But Icebox as well, if that comes back, would be, I think, a Harbor map as well. So, there's all hope is not lost for Harbor. There's still a chance that, he is still a decent agent and can see some pick rate. But then we come down to the doldrums. Okay, the less than 5%ers. And here we have Gecko, Neon, Phoenix, Yoru, Reyna, Sage, and Deadlock. And the big takeaway from everyone is going to be Deadlock is the only agent that hasn't seen any picks. Whoa, Deadlock, whoa, new agents, no good, oh my god. And I know that a lot of people are going to say that, but actually I think we'll get to that in a second. First, let's talk about Gecko and Neon and Phoenix and maybe even Yoru, because all of these agents have seen some play and they've all seen, relative some success, right? Where they can be used in good ways. We've seen, obviously, Jinx, Phoenix, most notably perhaps, find a lot of success on Pearl and, has looked really good. And I personally think that Phoenix is probably a little underrated by most teams because I think at the pro level, Phoenix flashes are perhaps the only flash that you see actually hit pro players consistently, right? Pro players are very, very good at turning flashes, but Phoenix flashes tend to catch them out more so than the other flashes in the game. So I personally think that that's like a little thing that maybe some pro teams are underrating because Jing has found a lot of value with those Phoenix flashes on Pearl. Yoru as well has found some success. We've seen it for DRX against Fnatic most recently. We've seen it for EG on Pearl as well, right? The Yoru has actually found some success on different maps, and so maybe as well, just could use with some like fine-tuning to help overall. The Reyna we haven't seen as much, but we even saw Kang do it on Bind as well. But now let's talk about Sage and Deadlock, because this is the thing. To me, it's not that Deadlock here is down at 0%. That to me is not really the talking point of the bottom of the list here. It's the fact that Sage is also the second least picked agent. And that, I think, is the thing you need to focus on. The fact that that type of agent in general is just not valued at the pro level, right? Deadlock is clearly meant as a kind of somewhat competitor with Sage for that kind of role, but it's very clear that pro teams do not think that that is a very good role of agent. And it makes sense as to why that would be the case, because for a lot of their utility, all you got to do is just bait out the Sage or Deadlock utility and then just wait, and then they don't have any utility left. And then they are a useless agent, right? Like, that is a big thing with these two agents that is just going to be different to a lot of the other agents in the game. So a lot of the focus will go to Deadlock because she's the new agent and she's the one that people, want to see in these pro games, to see what pros do with Deadlock. But the thing is, the type of agent that Deadlock is, pros just don't think are very good. So those were just some little discussions on the agents. I'll be interested to see, I'm always interested in seeing people, particularly people who watch this channel who perhaps are a bit plugged in than the wider Valorant community. I'm giving you guys some credit there. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Don't disappoint me with your brain dead takes. Give me some good takes of, what do you think Riot should do maybe to try and readdress the balance. I think overall the balance of the game isn't too bad, just some slight tweaks here and there, and I think we could be living in a kind of meta paradise.